It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. My next guest is Amber Tamblyn. Amber's had a really interesting career. She's the daughter of the actor Russ Tamblyn. She appeared in her first ever movie when she was 12. She starred for years on Joan of Arcadia. She was on General Hospital. Recently, she's been on Inside Amy Schumer a lot. She's also a poet, a real poet. She's had 3 books of poetry published. Her latest, Dark Sparkler, came out a couple of years ago. It features photographs by David Lynch. Now Tamblyn's written and directed her first ever feature-length film. It's called Paint It Black. It's based on the Janet Fitch novel of the same name. It tells the story of Josie, whose boyfriend Michael dies suddenly before the film begins. Josie, played by Alia Shawkat, grows closer to Michael's parents in the aftermath. But then things get complicated. In this scene, which takes place right after Michael's funeral, Josie's talking with Michael's dad, played by Alfred Molina.
He loved you, Josie. Thought you were smart, original, very real. You said your dad drives a tow truck?
Yeah. Yes.
Is there a mother in the picture? My dad was a fisherman out of Coos Bay, Oregon.
Is this what Michael thought of me? Some kind of novelty? Real. It's another word for whore, right?
No. Real means real. He loved you.
Yeah.
Amber Tamblyn, welcome to Bullseye. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I feel like there's a lot of death in your career lately. Like,
that's the most sinister laugh I could come up with right now.
Before you released this film, which is about the aftermath of a suicide, you wrote a book of poems that was about the untimely deaths of real-life actresses, show business actresses, movie actresses.
Yeah. It's like, I suppose it is a theme. I hadn't really fully considered that, but death is fascinating. There's a lot of life in death. There's a lot of revival in death, in the experience of it and the aftermath of it.
How long did you spend writing the book?
Dark Sparkler took about 7 years to write. I think in total, it went through many phases and iterations of itself, trying to find out what it was supposed to be. It sort of started as poems about the deaths, but also the lives of child star actresses. I was really fascinated by, my kin, my own, people who started out very young, women who started out very young in the business and then grew up and sort of lost themselves and then met untimely deaths. And then it went from that, and it sort of went further into, just women in general. They didn't have to be child stars, but women who actresses who passed away sort of in their 30s. And then it went even further into this sort of meta experience of what it felt like for me writing poems about dead actresses, about my dead peers, and sort of examining my life as a child actress, grown up, and also my own sense of feeling very lost and feeling very confused about who I was and what I wanted to ultimately do besides being an actress.
Did you feel like you had chosen to be an actress?
No, I don't think there was ever a choice in it. And I think, around the time that I started to write Dark Sparkler, the poems in there was the first time that I had ever thought about that question. It's a question that actors get asked all the time. And I've been asked so many times in so many interviews, how old were you when you knew you wanted to start acting? And it's a question that you sort of go into autopilot and answer it and say, well, when I was 11, I, was in a school for the performing arts, and then an agent came, and you have a story. And I remember in my early 20s, somebody asked me that in an interview, how old were you when you knew you wanted to act? And it hit me like a ton of bricks. It just hit me that I had never considered that it was a choice. It just, because when you act so young, when you start so young, there is no choice in it. You're a child. In my circumstance, in my case, it just kept going. It just didn't end. There wasn't a point at which I went, I'm going to think about this. You just sort of become an adult and keep doing it.
Did you ever think about something else?
Oh, always. I mean, I've been a poet as long as I've been an actress, which is always really surprising to people. I think they assume that it's a hobby that I picked up at some point in my life, kind of like how a celebrity puts out attempts to put out a Christmas album or something.
You're a cookbook, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's what people have thought it was. But, I grew up around a lot of poets and in Venice, California there in LA, and was raised around a lot of poetry and poets and music. So it's very endemic to me. I used to put out chapbooks when I was a kid, when I was, 11, 12, 13, 14, I was a teenager. It was something that people, for the most part, didn't really take seriously about me and sort of, again, felt it was just a hobby. But I think Dark Sparkler was the expulsion of their beliefs in who I was, but also my own doubts about myself, and just sort of searching for what were the other things that I wanted to do, which I knew that I wanted to write movies. I knew that I wanted to be taken seriously as a writer. I knew I was a good writer. How to get past that hump of being seen as just one thing and only being taken seriously as one thing is scary. It's scary to jump into the unknown like that and to be yourself.
You're listening to Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. I'm talking with the actress and writer Amber Tamblyn. She just made her debut as a director. Her movie's called Paint It Black. It's out now. Do you feel like you were able to find your voice or find a voice as an actress? I mean, I think that if you compare screenwriting or directing or writing poetry, they're all very direct creative expressions. Acting is a very much an interpretive creative expression, and not that directing or screenwriting aren't also collaborative, or that you don't have an editor when you're a poet, but it feels like a very different thing, and it feels like a much more difficult place to have a personal voice.
Yeah, I've said in the past, and I'll say it again, that I feel acting is only partially yours. It's only a piece of you, and you can't control what the performance you gave turns into, because you've got a director and you've got editors, and then you've got a studio, or you never get a studio, so it never sees the light of day. And then even if you make something incredible, it could be bought by a distributor who then butchers it and changes it and turns it into something else. And I think I've probably experienced every possible version of the good and the bad of my industry as far as acting is concerned. But the writing of it, there was an empowerment for me in writing a book like Dark Sparkler, or directing a film, or writing a screenplay, because I owned it. It belonged to me.
Why do you think that metamorphosis was driven by thinking about women who had been driven or driven themselves to death, particularly?
I think it comes with the isolation, with the loneliness, with, whether I would read an interview by somebody like a Brittany Murphy, who was the catalyst for that book. Brittany was a peer of mine. We went on a lot of the same auditions. I remember such a distinct moment of going in for the movie 8 Mile and sitting in the waiting room with a bunch of people, and she came out of the room, and then I was called in next, the audition room, and I was called in next, and we passed each other and we smiled, and we never met though. But there was a sense of, now we all know what we're doing, right? We all know what this life is and how isolating this life can be. So when she died, I remember how quickly and how downhill she went. And then there was all these stories about her, having eating disorders and pill addictions and all these things. And then she also died in a sort of very mysterious way. And I remember reading in all the interviews that I read and studied about her, I found this thing that she was into writing poetry. That really got me. Because I felt like for all the women that I studied, there was an alternative universe for them to succeed, and to succeed beyond success. What celebrity or what success or what acting means. There were little small parts of them that I saw myself in. What if Brittany Murphy wrote incredible poetry? And I think in the process of studying her death, certainly, and God, there's just so many women that went in a similar manner. I started to question and fear that I was like, oh, do I want to die? Is that what this is all about? And the truth is, I was, but not the type of death we think about. It wasn't literal death. It was, I needed a rebirth. I needed to be reborn in a mental way, in a spiritual way. So I was actually dying. And Dark Sparkler was a funeral of sorts, a celebratory funeral, a way to say this person is ceasing to exist and a new person is being born.
So when you decided to direct a film, why did you want to direct this story about a young woman who is living in the aftermath of her partner's suicide?
Well, I think much like my acting career, which was sort of accidental, I would say, the directing was accidental as well. I'd read the book maybe 10 years ago. Amy Poehler gave me a copy of the book. She's a funny lady coming up in the comedy world. You haven't heard of her yet, but she's gonna blow up. She's gonna be a huge star. You'll see, that Amy Poehler.
I'm familiar. She's the one from that TV show.
You'll be hearing all about her. You'll see. She's gonna be big star.
She's the one on that Comedy Central show who said dolphins can suck it, right?
Yes, you got it.
Ever since she said dolphins can suck it, that was probably the highlight of my entire sophomore year of college or whenever that was.
There's a T-shirt in there.
Dolphin, she goes, do you remember that one where it's like dolphins are like taking over the... I don't even remember. Those UCB sketches had the weirdest premises, but I just remember her going,
they're the best.
Dolphins can suck it. Suck it, dolphins. Yeah.
Perfect.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so Amy gave me the book and said, you have to read this just as a friendly, here's something to read. Nothing further than that. And I read it and I was really struck by Janet Fitch's language in the book, her poetic language. It struck a chord in the poet in me. I couldn't unsee the movie version of the book, which was not like any experience I had ever had before reading a book. It really was visceral for me. And then I sort of got this feeling of, if I don't try to get the rights of this book and do something with it, someone else is going to do it and ruin it. And so began a very long experience of trying to get the rights and get the movie made and all of that. And if there's anything to be known about me, I'm very tenacious about those things, and I don't take no for an answer once I've sort of become obsessed with something, and I will spend a lifetime literally trying to get something achieved. Paint It Black was an example of that, of just thinking this has to get made. And originally, when I first finally got the rights, I was wanting to write it as a movie for myself, thinking, I don't remember the last time there was a great role like this for somebody my age. At that time, my age was like early 20s, and I wanted to write something for myself. And then it was, cut 2 years later, there was another director attached who was the one that finally said to me after many, many meetings, in which I said, no, I don't think that's the tone of what this movie is, or that's what this scene is. Here's the way I see it. And she did me the grand favor of saying, I think you're missing the big point here, which is that you should be directing this film. And my first instinct was, no, I don't have the experience for that. It was a big no. I was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. And she said, what are you waiting for? And I thought, I don't know. Why don't I do that? And then once I started to do it, I went, oh, I'm made for this. This is what I should be doing.
I bet he never once took you to a decent restaurant.
No. We mainly just ate at home.
You poor thing. Michael couldn't boil water.
Michael was a great cook, actually. He had all these cookbooks. We even had this little garden with like herbs and stuff. Once he cooked a whole fish from the Chinese market with the head and the tail still on. We even ate the eyeballs. And the cheeks. That's the delicacy.
Do you think it's awful that I didn't know my own son any better?
I don't think anybody knows everything about somebody.
I thought it was really interesting that in this story, which is primarily driven by the woman who's lost her partner and her partner's mother, that the boyfriend, while he appears in the story in flashbacks, is, not that far from being a cipher. He is so not the subject of the film.
Yeah.
That the subject of the film is so specifically these two women. And I wonder if you made choices to make it clear that this film was about the women and not about the boyfriend who killed himself.
Yes, very much so. While the story the book itself doesn't pass the Bechdel test, I wanted to make a movie that sort of could, meaning that there were two women talking about a man in this movie, that was sort of the subject, the premise. But at the same time, I wanted it to feel like he almost didn't even matter. They were so obsessed with blaming each other over his death and their obsession over each other and their blindness in a state of grief made it so that they could be arguing over a doorknob. Like, it wouldn't matter anymore what the subject matter was that they were obsessed over. All that mattered was their unhealthy relationship. And I think, when I first wrote the script and I was taking it out to financiers, I got through my agency, I got a lot of notes back of people saying, we love the script so much. We just feel like there needs to be more of Michael in here, who's the young man who kills himself. And in the book, there's a lot of Michael in the book. You see a lot of flashbacks of him with Josie, who's the young woman, his girlfriend, the protagonist. And you really get a sense of their relationship and who they were. And like I said, when I read the book, that wasn't the interesting part to me. The interesting part was the women, the two women, and how they defined states of grief, how they were sort of going down these rabbit holes of psychosis. And the whole thing, the whole book, once they started to go really crazy, felt like some amazing, intense acid trip of just their thoughts and how dark they could get. And I was fascinated by that and thought how great it would be to make a movie that could encapsulate that without having to use expository dialogue necessarily, or actually showing, the relationship between Michael and Josie. So that was something that was really important to me, and I pushed really hard for years, saying I refuse to write in a bunch of flashback scenes. There's a couple of them in there just for taste, but it really, to me, that was not what the story was that interested me.
You by no means have to answer this question directly or otherwise, and we'll cut it out if you don't want to, but have you ever experienced the kind of blind grief that these two women are faced with in the film?
I haven't. I have experienced some versions of this grief, certainly not with a partner. And I think, now as a new mother, it's not even a thought that I can graze or touch, the idea of losing a child. And so you have these two women in the movie who are at such polar opposite experiences of their grief and in their lives, really. I think that young love, while that's incredibly painful, you'll get over that. It's possible in some version to lose a partner and be blinded by that and in so much pain, but to eventually heal in some way. And I think as a mother, you never heal from that. You never get over that. That's the sense that I got from the book too. When, you really see Meredith, the mother, played by Janet Fitch, you really see how awful the character becomes in so many ways. So I haven't personally experienced that, but I'm an empathetic person, and I think I can feel what that would feel like.
You became a parent like a month ago. Is it different than how you expected?
Yeah, it's a lot different. I mean, it's very challenging, very rewarding. It is everything that people say it is. It's terrifying, but it's pretty incredible. I'm very much enjoying it.
So which is a part that's different from what you expected? You expected that it would be a cakewalk but unrewarding?
I expected I was going to sort of disappear creatively, that my child was just going to become, I mean, and it's so new, anything could happen, but I definitely felt there was going to be a loss of myself, a loss of the creative part of myself. All the stuff that I've worked so hard for in the last 10 years was going to disappear. And in fact, it's the opposite. I think I feel more creatively flush than I've ever felt before, writing more poems. I was also pregnant during this election, which was, I went to the Women's March, 8.5 months pregnant. It was really intense. I traveled around for Hillary Clinton for the better part of a year to over 25 states, and all while pregnant. And it was a very, very intense experience. So I feel like there's so much for me to write and do creatively now and think about certainly how women are treated in the country and all over the world in a sort of juxtapositional light with the fact that I now have a daughter, and to see the way in which Hillary Clinton was treated during the campaign, and then think about that in context and in connection with my daughter and how hard it is to come back full circle to everything we just talked about, but to grow up and figure out who you are, especially as a woman. I went through it, and I think about my daughter and try to think about ways in which I can make it better and easier for her.
I have a baby that's a couple months old.
Oh, nice.
And my wife, since before she was pregnant, had been planning for the publication of her first book in the spring.
Uh-huh.
And it was like the prospect of being responsible for both the biggest deal of her creative life, which is like, oh, I co-wrote a book that's actually going to be available in bookstores.
Right.
And then just like the responsibility of, oh, the baby eats from my body.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's not even just like who's going to take care of the baby, but like, you know what I mean?
Oh, it's so real. It is the thing that makes me think like, oh, I was a feminist before. Now that I've had a kid, and now that I understand how hard women work, how present they are, how much they have to take on, I am so much more a feminist, but also just in awe of women, and especially mothers, but in awe of women in general in an even bigger way, because it is that, and it can't be understood how intense that experience is, but also how empowering and powerful it makes you feel. It's the closest understanding to and belief in God that I've ever had.
How's that?
Meaning that to think that this is what women can do and can do with their bodies, and the whole idea of breastfeeding and everything that comes with that, and how much women are capable of doing it, makes me think that there has to be a higher power. There has to be something that helped create this, because women are so amazing. So it's as someone who's never really believed in God, it's made me think that women are kind of godly, if that makes sense. And somewhere someone's gonna be really pissed that I just said that. But I really don't care. Really don't care.
Are you worried that while you're promoting your film, you'll just be really sleepy and make some terrible mistake?
What if I just hit my head on the mic right now and passed out and start snoring?
I'm asking that question only because that fear has been gripping me personally for the last 8 weeks. Like, I'm going to do something so awful on microphone.
Yeah, no, it's I take naps where I can on the subway. I mean, you get the sleep where you can, as it were.
Well, Amber Tamblyn, I'm so grateful that you took all this time to be on Bullseye. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Amber Tamblyn. Catch Painted Black right now. It's in limited release. We'll have showtimes for you on our website. Just go to the Bullseye page on MaximumFun.org.